Author's Notes on the History of London, Lessons 40 to 63, recorded sections 17 to 25. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Ruth Golding. The History of London by Walter Besant. Notes on Lesson 40, Elizabethan London, Part 1. Stowe, born 1525, died 1605. A famous writer in Queen Elizabeth's reign on the antiquities of London and other places. Whitechapel takes its name from a white chapel of ease built to relieve Stepney, in which parish this district was till 1763. Tenters, pegs for stretching cloth. Sometimes hooks were used, from which we get the phrase to be on tenter hooks, to be on a stretch with anxiety. St. Catherine's has given its name to the great docks east of the Tower. Bull, bear baiting, the sport of setting dogs to worry bulls or bears. Alsatia, for a vivid picture of this haunt of rogues in the reign of James I, the reader is referred to Sir W. Scott's Fortunes of Nigel. Austin Friars, the space known as Drapers' Gardens, because the hall of the Drapers' Company is adjoining, in Throgmorton Street, is on the site of this monastery. Canwick, now Cannon Street, was so called because the wax chandlers and candle makers lived in that part. End of notes on Lesson 40. Notes on Lesson 41, Elizabethan London, Part 2. William Shakespeare, born 1564, died 1616, the prince of poets, who lived in the reigns of Elizabeth and James I. Ruins of the monasteries, which had been suppressed by Henry VIII in 1536 to 1540. Cold Harbour, a merchant's mansion once standing on the bank of the Thames in Thames Street. Genevan bands, a kind of collar worn by Protestant clergymen, so called because Geneva, the home of Calvin, was the centre of Protestantism. Palaces along the Strand. If you walk along the Strand, you will notice that many of the short streets leading down to the river bear the names of noblemen, such as Arundel Street, Norfolk Street, Salisbury Street, etc., from the old palaces which once stood there. Staples Inn, a picturesque group of old houses in Holborn, was formerly a wool market. Staple means a fixed market. Wych Street is near Holywell Street in the Strand. Cloth Fair is now a poor neighbourhood near Smithfield. End of notes on Lesson 41. Notes on Lesson 42, Elizabethan London, Part 3. Impressment. In the absence of some orderly arrangement, such as conscription, where all serve, or a voluntary system, like our own, the press gang used to kidnap people and force them to serve. Animosity, anger, ill feeling against. The Steelyard, on the site of which Cannon Street railway station now stands, was the house of the Hanse merchants. John Colet, Dean of St. Paul's, born 1466, died 1519, was one of the leaders of the revival of learning in England. St. Paul's School, which he founded in 1512, has been moved to Hammersmith. End of notes on Lesson 42. Notes on Lesson 43, Trade, Part 1. Forestall their market, that is, to buy things before they arrived at the market, so as to sell them at a higher price. Lübeck, a large port in North Germany in the Baltic. Staples, originally all kinds of raw produce, came to be applied only to wool. Staples Inn was once a wool market. Instead of selling our wool. Edward III brought Flemish weavers into England to encourage manufactures. Till then, England produced and exported wool to Antwerp and other manufacturing centres, but did not make it into cloth. Hamburg was a member of the Hanseatic League. The screen was presented to the Church of All Hallows the Great, Thames Street, in 1710 by the Hanseatic merchants. End of notes on Lesson 43. Notes on Lesson 44. Trade, Part 2. Incubus. Something that weighs down and hinders. Religious wars in the Netherlands. Between the Protestant Dutch and the Catholic Spaniards, who were oppressing the country through great part of the 16th century. Bourse. The same as exchange, where merchants meet to transact their business. English wool in Bruges, because it was much exported thither from England before the growth of home manufactures. Flemings, the natives of Flanders, who were the chief manufacturers of Europe long before England took the lead. 14%. The height of this rate may be seen by comparing it with the 2.5%, which is all England now pays as interest upon her debt. Bethlehem Hospital, corrupted into Bedlam, is still a hospital, but only for the insane. End of notes on Lesson 44. Notes on Lesson 45. Trade, Part 3. Bruges to Civil Wars, that is, the religious wars referred to in Chapter 44. Venetians. Before the discovery of the sea route to India and the East, Venice was the first maritime and commercial power in the world. The route round the Cape of Good Hope was discovered by Vasco da Gama in 1497. Moluccas. A group of tropical islands between Celebes and New Guinea, rich in pearls, spices, and precious woods. Calicut. The port in Madras, where Vasco da Gama first landed in May 1498. The cotton cloth, called calico, was first brought thence. Moorish pirates. North Africa has always been a haunt of pirates. In 1816 Lord Exmouth had to bombard Algiers, and even as late as 1860 the European powers had to suppress piracy in Morocco. Dordrecht, a commercial town in the south of Holland, near Rotterdam. The South Sea Company is celebrated above the other trading companies for the great speculation in its shares, called the South Sea Bubble, in 1720. End of notes on Lesson 45. Notes on Lesson 46. Plays and Pageants, Part 1. Mummers. Men who played in entertainments, masked and in various disguises. Masque. A kind of play in which the actors wore masks. Milton's Comus is a well-known masque of high character. Mystery. A name for a religious play representing some scene from the Bible or scenes from the life of a saint. Admonition, warning. Frescoes. Paintings on a wall covered with plaster, done while the plaster is still wet or fresh. Sequence. That is, the connection of one event with another. Properties. The articles used in the play, scenery, dress, etc. Realistic. Looking as though they really were the persons represented. Tableau, scene. Lessee. One who rents a theatre or holds it on a lease from the owner. End of notes on Lesson 46. Notes on Lesson 47. Plays and Pageants, Part 2. Pageants. Grand shows, processions. Censers. Vessels for burning incense. Conduit. A pipe or channel for leading or conducting water. Cross of Chepe. A memorial erected in the centre of the Chepe or market in memory of Queen Eleanor. Jerkins. A kind of jacket often made of leather. Panoply, full armour. Banneret. A little banner. Blackjacks. Leather vessels for holding liquor. Malmsey. A strong sweet wine. Marshal. Draw up and arrange. Lord Mayor's Show, on November the 9th, when the people have an opportunity of welcoming the new Lord Mayor on his entering into office. End of notes on Lesson 47. Notes on Lesson 48. Plays and Pageants, Part 3. Libretto. The words of a masque or play set to music. Scenic, on the stage. Ben Jonson, born 1574, died 1637, a great English playwriter and poet, and a friend of Shakespeare. Francis Bacon Lord Verulam, born 1561, died 1626, was Lord Chancellor and a great writer on philosophical subjects. Oberon, the king of the fairies and husband of Titania, as in Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream. Save James, that is, King James I., a piece of courtly flattery due to Jonson's connection with the court. Prince Henry, who is meant by Oberon in the Masque, died in 1612, to the great regret of the people. Phosphorus. Lucifer, the morning star that brings the day. End of notes on Lesson 48. Notes on Lesson 49. Plays and Pageants, Part 4. Gamma, i.e. Old Mother, Girton's Needle, is a very rough old play about an old woman who lost her needle while mending a pair of breeches, and after accusing everyone of stealing it, finds it, after all, in the garment itself. It was written some time before 1560. Gamma, the French grand-mère, grandmother, contracted into Ganmer, and then Gamma. Contortionist, one who twists himself into extraordinary attitudes to amuse the public. Octagonal, with 8 sides. Prologue, the verses spoken before a play to introduce it to the audience. Golden Lane, a street near the Barbican turning out of Aldersgate Street. Bankside, in Southwark, on the southern side of the Thames. End of notes on Lesson 49. Notes on Lesson 50, The Terror of the Plague, Part 1. Pretensions, ambitious claims. Wars of the Roses, a civil war lasting 1455 to 1485. In thinking of the loss of life occasioned by this war, it must be remembered that such loss fell most heavily on the noble families. The mass of the population was not so much disturbed by it. Long Acre, a street near Drury Lane, now chiefly occupied by carriage makers. Delirium, a wandering in the mind caused by fever. End of notes on Lesson 50. Notes on Lesson 51, The Terror of the Plague, Part 2. Registers, a record of names of persons who have died. Such records are now accurately kept by the registrars of births, deaths, and marriages. The King, Charles II., who, whatever his faults may have been, was at least good-natured and averse to suffering. Samuel Pepys, born 1632, died 1703, was Secretary to the Admiralty in the reigns of Charles II. And James II. His famous diary gives a graphic picture of life during these reigns. End of notes on Lesson 51. Notes on Lesson 52, The Terror of Fire, Part 1. Coleman Street runs northward from Lothbury, behind the Bank of England, to Moorgate. The name goes back even to Saxon times, and probably comes from one Ceolmund, who had a farm near. St. Erkinwald, an early Saxon bishop of London, who encouraged the citizens to restore their ruined city, and himself built the Bishop's Gate, named after him. His shrine in St. Paul's was long an object of reverence. Paternoster Row, always a great centre of the book trade. It was a row immediately adjoining the precincts of the cathedral before encroachments were made. Naturally much of the booksellers' wares was religious, paternosters, aves, credos, etc. Chancel, the east end of a church in which is the altar, separated from the rest of the church by a screen or railings. Latin cancelli, a grating. Transept, the part of a cathedral projecting on either side. Cathedrals are generally built in the shape of a cross. The transept is the arms of the cross in the ground plan. End of notes on Lesson 52. Notes on Lesson 53, The Terror of Fire, Part 2. Astronomer, one who studies the stars or heavenly bodies. John Evelyn, born 1620, died 1706, a gentleman of the reign of Charles II., was made one of the commissioners for the restoration of London after the Great Fire. He wrote a diary which is not so amusing as that of Pepys. St. Dunstan in the East, in Tower Street, was the first church restored by Wren after the fire. John Dryden, born 1631, died 1700, one of the greatest English poets. He was a supporter of the House of Stuart, and was made Poet Laureate. Obnoxious, exposed to. End of notes on Lesson 53. Notes on Lesson 54, Rogues and Vagabonds. Vagabonds, wanderers who have no settled home. Wapping, called Wapping Wash or Marsh in the time of Queen Elizabeth, when it was first drained and banked in, lies on the north bank of the Thames in Middlesex, near the Thames Tunnel. Lambeth, facing Westminster on the south bank of the river, is low-lying, and was called in Saxon times Lambhythe, meaning loamy or muddy landing place. Bermondsey, EY = island, on the south bank of the Thames, 1 mile south east of St. Paul's, is a centre of the leather and wool trade. Rotherhithe, or Redriff, on the south bank of the Thames, lies east of Bermondsey and faces Wapping. The south end of the Thames Tunnel is in Rotherhithe. Stringent, strict. Impotent, powerless, unable to work. Stocks, a wooden frame in which the legs of criminals were confined. The Barbican, a street near the site of the old Aldersgate. Barbican means defensive works for a gate. Turnmill Street is near Farringdon railway station. End of notes on Lesson 54. Notes on Lesson 55 under George II, Part 1, The Wealth of London. Essayists, people who write essays, that is, short compositions on any subject. Picturesqueness, beauty and grace, qualities which might be supposed to make anything a good subject for a picture. Ruffles, pieces of some white material plaited and attached as a frill to the collar and sleeves of garments. Ostentation, making a great show. Puritanism, the more sober style of life and thought introduced by the Puritans, who were a religious party in the times of Elizabeth and the Stuarts, and were desirous of a purer and simpler doctrine and mode of living. End of notes on Lesson 55. Notes on Lesson 56 under George II, Part 2. Predecessors, those that went before them. Cruciform, in the form of a cross. The ground plan of many churches is shaped like a cross. St. Stephen's, Walbrook, stands behind the Mansion House, where the Walbrook used to flow. Lectureship, the office of a lecturer, one who gives lectures, discourses, or, as in this case, sermons. Money was left to pay for these sermons, that is, the lectureships were endowed. Harbouring, sheltering. Organisers, those who get up and arrange anything. Haymarket, obviously once a hay market, is near Trafalgar Square, and Coventry Street near Leicester Square. Innovations, novelties, new things. End of notes on Lesson 56. Notes on Lesson 57 under George II, Part 3. Broad Street, between the Royal Exchange and Liverpool Street. Whitecross Street is near the Barbican, Aldersgate Street. Whitechapel, in which is Middlesex Street, commonly known as Petticoat Lane, is reached through Aldgate. Hogarth, born 1697, died 1764, a celebrated English painter, chiefly famous for moral, satirical, and humorous pictures drawn from everyday life. Asphalt, a kind of mineral pitchy substance which melts in heat and can be laid down so as to form a hard, smooth roadway. Vauxhall, in Surrey, in the parish of Lambeth, on the south of the Thames. There was once an old manor house here, called Fawkes or Fox Hall. Bermondsey Spa, so called from a mineral spring discovered there in 1770. Spa, a place where there is a mineral spring, gets its name from a celebrated watering place in Belgium of that name. Punch, a drink containing 5 ingredients: water, spirits, sugar, lemon juice, spice. End of notes on Lesson 57. Notes on Lesson 58, under George II, Part 4. Decorous, behaving in a decent and respectable way. Appreciation, estimate, judgment about. Congregation, gathering together. Benjamin Franklin, born 1706, died 1790, a native of Boston, USA, who lived for some time in England. As a scientist he is famous for electrical experiments; as a politician, for the share he took in upholding the independence of the American States. Transmission, handing down from father to son. Externally, outwardly. St. Catherine's, Ratcliffe, Shadwell, Stepney are all in the East End of London. Jurisdiction, legal authority. End of notes on Lesson 58. Notes on Lesson 59, under George II, Part 5. Lighters, large boats or barges used in unloading ships. Bleaching grounds, where cloth was laid out to be bleached or whitened by the wind and sun. Hop bines, the stalks of hop plants. Transportation, conveying convicted criminals abroad. Till 1869 convicts were sent to Australia; now they are kept in convict prisons at home. Classification, dividing and arranging into classes. Embezzle, to steal something entrusted to one's care. Press gang, a party of sailors under an officer who forcibly took men to serve in the Royal Navy. Anarchy, absence of rule, disorder. Gordon riots, in 1780 led by the fanatic Lord George Gordon. The mob raised the cry of No Popery on account of a law then proposing to remove hardships from Roman Catholics. Riot and plunder were the real object of the mob: the disorder had to be suppressed by military force. Police, organised in 1829 by Sir Robert Peel, after whom the members of the force were called Bobbies and Peelers. End of notes on Lesson 59. Notes on Lesson 60, The Government of the City, Part 1. Denominations, religious bodies or sects, the members of which are all called by the same name. Latin nomen, a name. Every conceivable topic, every subject you can think of. Community, a people, the public. Achieved, won by effort. End of notes on Lesson 60. Notes on Lesson 61, The Government of the City, Part 2. Symbol of, the representative of, the presence of a policeman as the outward form taken by the law in the eyes of the people. Mote, meeting, hence folks' mote, meeting of the folk or people. Ward mote, meeting of those living in the same ward or city division. The companies, such as those of the goldsmiths, merchant tailors, drapers, etc. Quarter sessions, the sessions or sittings of the law courts in a county or city held every quarter. Archives, public records. Sergeant means servant, officer, here of the law. Ordinarily it is a rank in the army. End of notes on Lesson 61. Notes on Lesson 62, The Government of the City, Part 3. Advocate, argue in favour of. Tenacity, perseverance, holding on. Latin teneo, to hold. Livery, because the members of the different trade companies used to wear a distinguishing uniform or livery. Fletchers, arrow makers. French flèche, an arrow. Trust money, money entrusted for a certain purpose, for which alone it can be used. Technical, where useful trades and sciences are taught. End of notes on Lesson 62. Notes on Lesson 63, London, Greater London. Conservative, preserving so far as convenient the present state of things. Functions, powers and duties. Reformatory schools, where boys and girls who have committed some crime are sent to be reformed to better ways. Assets: property actually held so that it can be set off against a debt. Democratic: giving power and influence to the people. Oligarchic: giving power and influence to the few. Law-worthiness: right to assist in the making of laws. End of notes on Lesson 63. End of notes for Lessons 40 to 63. End of notes and end of The History of London by Walter Besant. Recording by Ruth Golding.